Kamala Harris lost to Donald Trump. Will she run for president again? A look at her historical campaign and run to the White House. What does Kamala Harris's loss in the 2024 election mean for the U.S.? Analysts say race and gender played a significant role in Harris's defeat, but so did voter disillusionment. Kamala Harris. Vice President Kamala Harris' loss in the U.S. presidential election means that she has become the second female candidate to be beaten by Republican Donald Trump, despite mounting a historic campaign. For the analysts who spoke to Al Jazeera, Harris's loss brought a sense of déjà vu, echoing the defeat of fellow Democrat Hillary Clinton in 2016. They stressed that Harris's race and gender played a pivotal role in her defeat at the hands of former President Trump, whose political career has been defined by sexism and racism. The biggest underlying dynamic in American politics right now is views toward race, views toward gender, said Trissa Undum, a public opinion researcher focused on gender. Undum and other experts predict the Democrats will face a tsunami of backlash, given the stakes of the 2024 election. Harris and the Democrats are going to face a whole lot of wrath, Undum explained. There will be all kinds of narratives. What's wrong with Democrats? What's wrong with Harris? Was it her race and gender? She talks about abortion too much. As the shock of Harris' loss settles, Mike Nellis, a former advisor to Harris's 2020 campaign and a founder of the group White Dudes for Harris, said there will be crucial lessons for the Democratic Party to heed as it faces the battles ahead under President-elect Trump. Everybody will have an opinion, Nellis told Al Jazeera. All of our hair will be on fire. The deep-seatedness of white supremacy. Had she won, Harris would have shattered glass ceilings and become the first woman, second black person, and first South Asian to be elected to the highest office in the land. Harris herself made little mention of the historic nature of her presidential bid during her compressed, three-month sprint to Election Day, after President Joe Biden dropped out in July. Instead, she pitched herself as a candidate for all Americans, running a centrist campaign and promising a continuation of Biden's policies. Part of that strategy included overtures to Republicans disillusioned with Trump, and she campaigned alongside conservative lawmakers like former U.S. Representative Liz Cheney. But it wasn't enough to win her the White House. This loss indicates we still have so much more work to do here in the U.S. in terms of sex and race relations, said Tammy Vigil, a professor at Boston University, whose research focuses on women in politics. Vigil said that Trump has afforded people the ability to be their worst selves, and that definitely includes being sexist and racist. The question of gender and race will continue to be a mobilizing force, she added. It's going to be a big rallying cry. For Nadia Brown, the director of the Women's and Gender Studies program at Georgetown University, there is no question that Harris was the better qualified candidate in the race. She had decades of government experience under her belt, from her time as a public prosecutor to her service in the Senate and White House. That raises questions about why so many voters opted for her opponent, Brown explained. This loss just underscores the amount of ingrained racism and white heteropatriarchy, the deep-seatedness of white supremacy in this nation, Brown said. You can't deny that she is someone who could have served as president on day one. Trump has repeatedly described Harris as low IQ and mentally disabled, even calling her one of the dumber people in the history of our country. That kind of rhetoric, Brown said, gave his supporters a license to dismiss and denigrate Harris. The way that Trump has painted her and people's responses to her have just brought out the worst in a lot of folks. Andra Gillespie, a political scientist at Emory University in Atlanta, noted that Harris is not the first presidential candidate to encounter hurdles based on race or gender. She pointed to former President Barack Obama, the first black president of the U.S., who faced repeated questions about his country of birth and whether he was Muslim. And then there was Clinton, the first female presidential nominee from a major party. During her campaign, Trump supporters rallied under signs that read, But Gillespie argued it was doubly hard for Harris because of the combined force of misogyny and racism. Harris experienced them differently because she is both a woman and a person of color. Playing the blame game. But Harris's loss does not solely come down to questions of race and gender. Several analysts said the Democratic Party will have to grapple with how effectively it was able to connect with key demographics during this presidential race, including those disenchanted by Harris's stance on Israel's war in Gaza. The war had splintered the party in the lead-up to the election, with progressives, Arab Americans, and Muslim voters largely opposing the Biden-Harris administration's continued support of Israel. Dalia Moghaddad, a former research director at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, had warned that Harris's pro-Israel stance had the potential of costing her the election. But she emphasized it would be unfair to blame specific demographics for Harris's loss. It's the candidate that should be earning people's votes, not feeling entitled to them, Moghaddad said. Still, she feared that the tendency to assign blame may crop up now that Harris has been defeated. When Trump was first elected in 2016, there was a lot of liberal sympathy for Muslim and Arab people who were seen as victims of his policies, Moghaddad said. Trump implemented what critics called a Muslim ban in 2017, restricting entry from 7 Muslim-majority countries. But given the large Arab American and Muslim backlash to Harris's support for Israel, that same sympathy might not be present this time around, Moghaddad warned. Muslims might feel very isolated in a second Trump presidency, she said, and it's going to be a very difficult 4 years for anyone who is advocating on behalf of the humanity of Palestinians. For Rasha Mubarak, a Palestinian-American community organizer from Florida, Harris's defeat highlights the Democratic Party's failures to connect with key elements of its base. The Democratic Party continues to fail in listening to their voters, Mubarak said, citing the party's support for Israel, as well as its lack of engagement with under-resourced communities. She pointed out that, while Trump also boasts pro-Israel policies, Democrats like Harris had an opportunity to take action to alleviate the humanitarian concerns raised by Israel's war. But they did not. They had the power to place an arms embargo, but instead chose to continue to fund and endorse Israel's genocide. And now it is the people in this country that will continue to suffer, Mubarak explained. But the people have spoken, and this is a message that they will no longer continue to vote for a cleaner dirty shirt. Nellis, the former Harris advisor, stressed that to be successful in future presidential races, Democrats must ask themselves, what are the things about us that we can change? The condensed nature of Harris's campaign did not help, Nellis said, but Democrats need to think about the voters they left behind. That includes demographics commonly associated with the Republican Party. I want to have a serious conversation about how we're talking to and trying to bring back non-college educated white men. I want to talk about rural voters. I want to talk about going into hostile spaces and trying to win folks back, he said. Most urgently, he added, we need to be mobilizing to fight back and try to stop some of the worst things that Trump is going to want to do. What happens now? With Harris defeated, Brown, the Georgetown University professor, predicts the U.S. will not see the groundswell of protest that greeted Trump's first win in 2016. In 2017, the day after Trump was inaugurated, thousands of women flooded the streets in Washington, D.C. and other cities with pink hats and feminist slogans. Activists around the country organized anti-Trump resistance campaigns. Brown said that there may be some protests this year, though likely not to that scale. I've been doing focus groups with black women who are the most reliable Democratic voters, and what they're sharing is that they are just exhausted. They are fatigued. They are burned out, said Brown. Why Donald Trump won and Kamala Harris lost. An early analysis of the results. Trump won a personal victory in the 2024 election, sweeping all the swing states, improving his vote share just about everywhere, and unlike his 2016 victory, garnering an outright majority of the popular vote. In addition, he led the Republican Party to a larger-than-expected Senate majority, and although many House races remain to be called, an expanded House majority may result as well. These gains are more than incremental. Indeed, they may signal a new era in American politics. Political scientists and historians will spend years analyzing the causes and significance of this election. My focus is more immediate. Although the data are imperfect and incomplete, I will offer preliminary answers to two questions, which are really two sides of the same coin. Why did Donald Trump win the 2024 presidential election, and why did Kamala Harris lose? Trump's victory. Donald Trump's theory of the case was broadly correct. He and his campaign managers believed that it was possible to build on Republicans' growing strength among white working-class voters to create a multi-ethnic working-class coalition. He was right. If the exit polls turn out to be accurate, he made strides among Latinos and African Americans, especially men. He increased his share of the black male vote from 12% to 20% and carried Hispanic men by 9 points, 54% to 45%. The Trump campaign also believed that they could improve their performance among young adults, and they did, from 35% in 2020 to 42% this year. Anecdotal evidence suggests that most of this gain reflected a shift toward Trump among young men. Trump spent lots of time on podcasts, such as Joe Rogan's, whose principal audiences are this otherwise hard-to-reach group. After the Republican primaries, the victorious Trump forces faced a choice. They could moderate their message to reach out to disappointed backers of Nikki Haley, who ran a traditional Reagan conservative campaign, or they could continue their all-out appeal to the Republican base while enjoying the grudging support of his defeated adversary. They chose the latter course and won the gamble that the party would unite around them. Donald Trump received 94% of the Republican vote and, as a bonus, reduced the Democratic edge among independents from 9 points in 2020 to 5 points this year. The Trump campaign's tactical choices paid off. 3 turned out to be critical. First, convinced that Trump's intense personal bond with his supporters would do most of the mobilizing work, the campaign decided not to invest heavily in traditional get-out-the-vote organizing and instead outsourced it to supporting organizations. Although the Harris campaign touted its advantage in the ground game, there is little evidence that it made much of a difference. Second, the Trump campaign decided that Harris' stance on transgender issues was the Willie Horton of 2024 and invested heavily in negative advertising that dominated the airwaves throughout the South. Anecdotal evidence suggests that this campaign helped weaken Harris' effort to portray herself as a common-sense center-left candidate rather than an emissary from San Francisco. Third, Donald Trump chose to modulate his stance on abortion by declaring early on that each state should decide this matter for itself, and then doubling down by vowing to veto a national abortion ban. Many longtime foes of abortion were disappointed, and some were outraged. Nevertheless, Trump paid no price, winning 81% of the white evangelical vote, virtually unchanged from 4 years ago. Harris' defeat. The Harris campaign was always running uphill. She served as vice president to a president whose approval rating plunged in the middle of his first year in office and never recovered. The public's judgment of his performance on 2 core issues, inflation and immigration, was harshly negative, and Harris inherited this disapproval when Joe Biden abandoned his quest for a second term. The fact that Biden waited so long to leave the race also worked against Harris. The president's tardy decision deprived her of the opportunity to sharpen her arguments in a primary fight and shortened the time she had to introduce herself to the voters. She did the best she could in the circumstances by quickly unifying the party and building on Biden's campaign apparatus rather than starting from scratch, but she never entirely overcame the difficulties stemming from Biden's timetable. Harris' theory of the case was flawed. Looking at examples from the 2022 elections, she assumed that putting reproductive rights at the center of her agenda would mobilize an army of angry women and move them to the polls in record numbers. This did not happen. Women's share of the total vote rose only marginally from its level in 2020, and Harris' share of the women who voted did not increase from Biden's 2020 levels. It is hard to judge how much this emphasis on abortion contributed to Harris' poor showing among men, just 43%, down from Biden's 48% in 2020. But it did nothing to convince them that a Harris administration would be sensitive to their concerns. Her closing argument, that Donald Trump posed a clear and present danger to democracy, fared little better. This happened in part because many Republicans and independents saw Harris and the Democrats as the real threats to democracy, and also because the charge offered no new information that would sway voters whose minds weren't made up. Donald Trump may be the best-known candidate in modern American history, making it difficult to change anyone's view of him. Harris' tactical choices made her problems worse. First, she spurned opportunities to create a clearer political profile. Although Biden's unpopularity burdened her campaign, she refused to separate herself from him in any way that broke through to persuadable voters. Similarly, by refusing to explain why she had abandoned the progressive positions on crime, immigration, healthcare, and climate change, she blurred the public's perception of her and opened the door to the Trump campaign's charge that she was a closet radical. Thinking back to the successful campaign of Bill Clinton in 1992, some Democrats were hoping Harris would have a Sister Souljah moment in which she broke with some party orthodoxy in order to show her independence, but this did not happen. Second, Harris' decision to avoid media interviews during the first half of her campaign created the impression that she was dependent on scripted remarks and afraid to think on her feet. Answering tough questions can enhance a candidate's reputation for competence and character, a potential upside to which Harris and her campaign seemed oblivious for much too long. Conclusion: Democrats knew that the election would be close, but the scope of their defeat will likely trigger recriminations first, and then an extended period of soul-searching. As was the case after Michael Dukakis' defeat in 1988, the party will be forced to engage in a debate about the causes of its defeat, and what is sure to be a long and lively primary campaign will determine the path forward. Meanwhile, President Trump will be challenged to honor the sweeping promises he made during his campaign. It remains to be seen whether he can impose massive tariffs without raising costs for average families and triggering another round of inflation. Also uncertain is whether he can quell conflict in Ukraine and the Middle East as quickly as he claims while reducing America's global commitments. And it is possible that trying to deport millions of immigrants present in the U.S. could blow up in his face by creating civil strife and a backlash among Latino voters who have rallied to this cause. If he fails to meet the hopes that he has aroused, especially in the new supporters who provided his majority, he and his party may pay a price in 2026 and beyond. A sacred obligation: how Harris is approaching certifying her own election loss to Trump. On Monday, as Vice President Kamala Harris presides over a joint session of Congress to certify her own election loss to Donald Trump, she will be focused on ensuring a peaceful transfer of power and avoiding the deadly chaos that enveloped the Capitol exactly 4 years ago, according to interviews with 5 people familiar with her thinking, including a White House official, 2 current Harris aides, and 2 former Harris aides. In a recorded video message about her role Monday, obtained first by NBC News, Harris says it is a sacred obligation that she will uphold, guided by love of country, loyalty to our Constitution, and my unwavering faith in the American people. On January 6, 2021, Trump held a rally in Washington, D.C., where he baselessly claimed that the election was stolen from him and urged his vice president, Mike Pence, not to certify the election results. Many of his supporters then marched to the Capitol and stormed the building. On that day, Harris, then the vice president-elect, was inside Democratic National Committee headquarters when a pipe bomb was discovered near a park bench outside the building. Capitol Police and the Secret Service evacuated her minutes later. If you enjoyed from this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more content. Thanks for watching.